This is a recording of our How to Develop an eLearning Strategy webinar session. What I did with these recordings is I removed the interactive sections from the webinar and just focused on the content sections. So if you're listening to this because you couldn't get to the live session, what you sort of missed out on is the whiteboard sessions and the discussions that happen around the edge of things. This is also one reason why the recording is actually a lot shorter than the actual sessions, because those interactive sections take up time. Now, just quickly a little bit about what Sprout Labs does. Essentially what we do is help organizations that deal with complex services and products design and redesign their learning programs. We have a strong focus on digital learning in that area as well. During this webinar, there's a few things we're going to be talking about. What a strategic approach to e-learning really looks like. Our suggested stages of developing an e-learning strategy. A real little bit about how digital learning technologies can be used to embed the 70-20-10 learning approaches, and then some guidelines for when to some guidelines about when to do in-house development, and then also some guidelines about when to outsource development. This is one of the things in the webinar we didn't quite have time to cover, so I'm going to cover that in more detail during this recording. So first of all, you've already heard me use the term digital learning. Generally, we don't talk about e-learning anymore, we talk about digital learning. The reason for this is really e-learning has become associated with bad quality learning experiences, basically. Information dumps, voiceovers of slides with minimal engagement, and quite often just knowledge quizzes at the end. It's quite often been driven by just pure cost saving and compliance. So it's not actually a problem with it. It's not releasing the full potentials of what digital learning technology can do. So we're using the term digital learning, and we're seeing it being adopted more widely for a couple of reasons. One, from a learning point of view, it's a more holistic term. So it takes in things like social learning, performance supports, and blended learning approaches that go beyond just face-to-face and online. So the other side of it is that digital learning aligns with the use of the term digital in marketing as well, and other parts of the business. So marketing stopped talking about online marketing or mobile marketing or email marketing. It's actually this digital marketing as an umbrella term for the use of technologies for marketing. Sometimes it just gets shortened to digital, and I think there's sort of getting this alignment between your learning area and the wider use of the thinking around digital thinking is a really powerful thing. Now, first thing, what do we mean by this word strategy? I was recently asked to outline what Sprout Labs' strategy for delivering projects was, and it made me sort of question actually what that strategy word means. We are in a spot where we quite often work with clients and organizations around strategy and working in a strategic way. And it made me sort of question what we really meant by that. The definition I ended up coming back up with, which was a sort of one that I think works quite nicely in lots of different situations. Not a very academic definition. Strategy is about knowing where you're going. The way I think about it is in terms of playing a game of chess. You're not just playing for the next move and thinking about your next move with your opponent, but you're actually thinking about your next move and 3 steps ahead. So what you're doing today is putting the foundations together for the future. I think that's the really difference between reactive thinking, and especially reactive thinking in the L&D, where people are coming to you and asking for courses or for asking for particular things, and a more strategic approach, which means you're actually looking forward to where the organization's going, looking at the skills and capacity that they need. We actually have come across a few organisations where the learners and the business is actually asking for digital learning experiences, and L&D is not delivering that. So that's sort of almost a reactive thing. But quite often the move into digital learning is actually something that's being driven by L&D, or the improvement to L&D is driven by the improvement to digital learning is driven by the L&D area. So for me, the key to strategy is alignment. And by this I mean alignment to where the organisation's strategy is going, which then should filter down and flow into alignment to your L&D strategy. In a mature situation, you're probably working in a way where digital learning is just part of the learning and development strategy. If digital learning is new to your organisation, that's probably the time when you might be putting in a separate digital learning or e-learning strategy in place. And because it just takes a different level of focus during that startup. But in most cases, it becomes just part of your wider learning and development environment. Not always easy. Sometimes organisations actually don't have a good strategy in place for the future. And that's where sometimes you have to work with the capacity to build innovation into the future as well. In terms of the outcomes from a strategy project, and the outcomes, and two things you need to be thinking about in terms of as you're working on a strategy is blueprints and roadmaps. We've made this sort of separation between the two for a couple of reasons. We see blueprints as bigger picture documents that might have things like principles that you're going to follow as you're developing digital learning, or reforms if you're changing the way you're doing your digital learning. These blueprints might stay into place for a longer period of time, and then your roadmaps really define your when and how. The roadmaps are the things that might change more often, and you might review them more often, but your blueprints stay in place for a longer term. We also have seen and worked a number of times with curriculum blueprints where you might have a number of content and skills areas that people need to develop skills in, and the blueprints and the curriculum blueprints need to define how people they need to define learners' journey to get to that spot. Especially really useful when you've got a cluster of say 10 or 50 modules rather than just one particular thing you're developing. Now, there's really 6 areas that your strategy document needs to address. I'm not going to talk about all of these. I'm just going to touch on a few of them. The technology one can feel really overwhelming as you're starting up, and it does become your focus if you L&D it hasn't worked with digital technology before, which is why your actual team skills are really important, and that team skills is an ongoing thing as well. I've clustered the learning experience here as well into not talking about learning assets or learning content or learning courses, but rethinking it as your learning experience. So this learning experience might be both your online modules as well as your social learning experiences. That might be things like virtual classrooms or forums, to really think about that in a holistic way. A couple of things that people sometimes forget is factoring in at a strategy level your measurement, and the measurement of how your strategy is going. I'll talk a little bit later about data collection. I think we're getting better as an area of doing evaluation work at a program level, but not always factoring in how we actually have frameworks for measuring at a strategy level. The last but not least is governance, especially if you're going down the track of doing any in-house development. we've seen a couple of times organisations putting in a learning management system and saying anyone can put whatever they want on a learning management system. So then after a period of time, what actually happens is that those organisations then turn around and go, wow, we've got a quality problem. We've got lots of content, but everyone hates doing the courses, and we probably should have been a little bit more careful about what went into the learning management system. At the opposite end to that, we've seen organisations where essentially 3 different areas have had to approve any modules that go into a learning management system. So essentially L&D needed to be involved, IT needed to be involved, and branding needed to be involved. So thinking through at the beginning to make sure your governance model is your right fit for the approach you're doing and it doesn't overcomplicate things as well is a really important aspect. Now, I'm going to talk about the stages of developing the e-learning strategy. And it's both our approach that we're talking about here is actually a little bit of developing and a little bit of doing as well. Essentially, there's 5 stages, and I'll drill into each one of these in more detail in a few moments. Taking stock of where you are, looking at what else is happening, planning, which is the documents we've just started to talk about, the getting started, possibly prototyping and exploring, and then making sure you're factoring in measurement as well. So taking stock of where you are, it's sort of different if you've got existing digital learning happening in the organisation to if you're starting out. Just talk a little bit about the getting started and having existing practices happening. A really good way of sort of figuring out where you are with that practice is doing benchmarks. One of the most powerful benchmarks we've used repeatedly is the Towards Maturity benchmark. The Towards Maturity benchmark is run out of an organisation in the UK. Thousands of organisations do it per year. It gives you a really good guidance about your strengths and weaknesses. The hassle with it is 2 things. One, that it takes about 2 or 3 hours to do. That's got its positives and negatives because essentially we find we have really interesting conversations with people around their digital learning while they're doing the survey. The other side of it is the benchmark builds in the notion that in-house development is actually the more mature approach to go. So we've seen one organisation in particular that has really low quality learning experiences and low learning effectiveness because doing in-house development work, but actually end up with quite a high maturity mark because of that. Now, if you're starting out, you don't have anything to be able to benchmark, but I do encourage you to still take an approach of auditing and pausing and looking at what you're doing. I'm calling this a skills audit because what you can find is all of a sudden people in your L&D team or people involved in training might have digital media skills that you didn't think that they had. Someone might spend their weekends making video. We've discovered some people are actually really quite talented graphic designers, and possibly that's what their other career might have been. And you can really harness these sorts of other skills when you move into these digital areas. So you sit there and just take a little bit of a sort of stock of where people are at. Another one that's really useful is people who have been involved in any web design in the past as well. Now, that's there's 2 other things to take into account as well. It's the digital literacy of your employees and the digital literacy of your organisation. The digital literacy of your employees, one really useful thing to do is to survey people about how they learn outside of work and how they would prefer to learn at work as well. What we've actually found a couple of times in organisations when we've done this is what we've uncovered is a real drive and desire for a different way of learning in the organisation. This has actually also helped to drive change. If the employees are sitting there saying we need a different way of working and learning in this organisation, that really quite often is quite a nice wake-up call to the management of an organisation. Quite often an organisation will talk about their employees in a way where they're not ready for digital learning and for mature learning approaches. And this is actually because as an organisation, they're not digitally literate. And this is where you just sort of have to sometimes balance this sort of organisational digital literacy with your actual employees as well. And what we're actually seeing is essentially the use of digital technologies is being driven by use of them in personal life and consumer technology, which often means that your employees are more digitally literate than what your organisations are. Doing this sort of survey approach also just stops people talking for the end users as well. The other thing to take into stock is, and to pause, is to think about your learning effectiveness. By learning effectiveness, I mean essentially the quality of your learning. A couple of things to think about is the Serious eLearning Manifesto has I think about 22 principles about what great e-learning looks like. We've used these in a number of ways to help organisations embed them into quality frameworks for e-learning. So this then means that people can actually sort of go, actually this is effective or not effective. This is the type of e-learning we want. The other learning effectiveness framework that's quite useful is Will Sassmer's decisive dozen of 12 things that he thinks is important to learning effectiveness. You wouldn't sort of charge into a digital learning strategy and taking on digital learning and expanding digital learning without pausing for a moment to see what else is happening. Strongly encourage you to go and talk to other learning and development people, both in your industry as well as people who are not in your industry. The word of caution about this is build on what people have done, don't copy what people have done. Because of the quality issues in e-learning, if you just copy what people do, you'll keep on copying their mistakes. A really powerful question to ask people is, what would have you done differently? So an example of this is a client that's actually managed to increase their e-learning adoption really quickly by actually learning from others, was use this question. So when they went into one organisation and said, so you have 16,000 users, you have 200 courses, what will you do differently? And the learning and development person in charge of e-learning in that organisation turned around and said, not use Moodle. We would have used Totara. So this other new organisation just sat there and went, okay, all right, learn from that. Everyone else is saying use Moodle. We're going to use Totara, and we're going to learn from that experience about what they would have done differently. Also, when you're doing what else is happening is to look into the future. Strategy is about moving forward, not looking backwards. Digital learning is driven by technology. So if you're looking to the future, you'd probably be in a spot where you need to be making sure that your digital learning strategies are factoring in things like mobile learning. Australia has a huge adoption of mobile learning, and also thinking through how you're factoring in social technologies as well, and sharing and collaborating. In the webinar, we did an exercise after this about what sort of technologies are affecting the workplace, and essentially that's what came through. Was two things: was mobile and social technologies. And I think that's one of those things that no matter, even if you're working in a single site, people still are in a spot where quite often they have bring your own devices, and the use of those needs to be thought through in terms of how they can be possibly harnessed for learning as well. Now, planning stage, which is essentially the producing your documents, the blueprints and the roadmaps that I was talking about before. So focus on your what, how and who. A couple of suggestions: make it visual. try to develop a diagram that summarizes it all. Use stories to tell it. If you're producing a business case, I would be cautious about focusing on cost reduction. What the Towards Maturity benchmark has found is that the organisations that focus on measuring their cost decrease actually only get about a 5% decrease in cost. We're moving to using digital learning, so that the cost reductions can actually be a bit of an overpromise. What you do get is a whole lot more flexibility. So what Towards Maturity has generally found is that about 40% of people, 40% more people access online learning than what face-to-face learning. So this means a greater uptake of learning. In some industries like healthcare, it actually means the compliance modules actually get done and compliance gets actually completed. The other promise is that it can be more interactive and lead to a greater level of efficiency, which means you need to move beyond just knowledge quizzes and to really think about your interactive design of your learning as well. So the next stage, which is planning, which is sort of not active, is actually a doing stage, especially if you're actually getting started. There's a whole lot of things to learn, a whole lot of new jargon. If you're coming to it from a spot where you haven't worked with digital technologies, there is a big learning curve. So I encourage what you to do, especially if you're getting started, is to do a smaller plan that's actually about putting a pilot together. And then once you've done the pilot, once you've learned from that, is to go back to make sure and then expand what you're doing as well. So you have a sort of learning cycle built into your actual strategy as well. There's and I do strongly encourage you during those pilots to really take control over what you're doing. Don't let your vendors upload modules to your learning management system and set them up. Take responsibility for your learning management system that you're piloting. Really sort of get your hands dirty to figure out what's happening and what's not happening and what the possibilities are. It might not be you personally, it might be someone in your team, but do get your hands dirty. If you're changing your approach rather than starting out, innovation projects are a great way of sort of proving the merits of a different style of approach. So you might be saying, we're moving from focusing on self-paced e-learning work to blended learning work. We're introducing virtual classrooms to our mix of mediums we're using, like this virtual classroom. And to start with, what you're going to do is just a series of innovation projects to see how that goes. One in particular, actually two L&D people we've worked with in the finance sector, they do these pilots and innovation approaches, but they do them with 10,000 people. And it just gives a little bit of a sense of safety for everyone to be able to sit there and say, actually, this is a new way of working. We're just going to trial this to see how it's going. I also suggest you start with blended learning projects rather than a fully 100% online. A lot of people actually, that's what they aspire to, is 100% online. You actually probably lose a lot of your learning effectiveness by actually doing everything online. It's actually not something to aspire to. That a blended learning approach that might be a mixture of self-paced virtual classrooms and forums is actually going to be more effective in the long run. My other suggestion, especially if you're getting started, is don't start with your corporate induction. Two reasons for this. Your corporate inductions have some learning challenges around the fact that they're actually quite often more awareness campaigns, and it's very hard to get learning objectives for corporate inductions that have doing verbs in them. You end up with lots of things where people need to know rather than do, and that creates a problem with creating really great interactive experiences. The other reason why corporate inductions don't make a good starting point is quite often, and rightly so, senior management care a lot about corporate inductions, and that means they're harder to do pilots on and learn from during, because there's less of a less tolerance for things going wrong with them. There can also be a fairly big activity that involves lots of parts of the organisation as well. So trying to choose something that's smaller, that you can contain a little bit better, is actually probably a better way to get started. So in actual fact, quite often after this getting started, you might then loop back to your planning stage and revise your planning stage. You might have actually had your actual blueprint in place, and really what you're doing at that reworking of your planning is actually reworking your roadmap a little bit. Now, the other thing is, at a strategy level, to focus on how measuring and how you're going to measure your digital learning outcomes. This might be about doing something like putting in an evaluation framework and saying we will be evaluating against these types of learning effectiveness approaches. Will Falsman's recently written a really good book, which is actually, I think the title of it is Reinventing Smart Sheets. Should have actually looked at that before I actually started talking about it. Essentially reinventing the end of course surveys, but really rethinking it around measuring learning effectiveness rather than giving feedback on facilitators. So the big thing about the measuring approach is to make sure you collect data, but also you analyze the data and then use the data for telling stories as well. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about traditional approaches to getting started, and then also what I call contemporary approaches, and then drill a little bit into how alternative approaches can be used as well. So the traditional approach to getting started in digital learning is to sit there and do a whole, we need a learning management system. And if you're lucky, you might be in a spot where it might have some social tools like forums. It might allow you to also be able to book face-to-face courses and integrate virtual classrooms. And then you choose a development tool to be able to develop self-paced content to be able to load into that learning management system. We've never seen a learning management system adoption or change process be easy for organizations. It is an enterprise system. You will need to get your IT people involved. You will need to find yourself talking about things like single sign-on and LDAP and Active Directory and things that are really not normally possibly part of your life as a learning and development person. Especially if you're getting started, I think there's other ways of actually getting started rather than going straight down and going to the learning management system approach to start with. If you're probably focusing 100% on compliance management, you probably really do need a learning management system in place to be able to track and measure that. But digital learning is not just about compliance management. So a more contemporary approach would be to use what's called and put what's called at the center is a learning record store. Learning record store works with a new way of being able for resources to be able to talk to servers, basically, called XAPI. Sometimes also, I'm actually using the abbreviation, it's called Experience API. So what it allows you to be able to do is, say, have a mobile app that sends data back to your learning record store, and then you have a single point of reference for everything a learner's doing across many different things. And you might still have your learning management system in place to be able to send things back. I have heard one organisation talk about this learning record store adoption process in a way where they were working with intranets and portals and social, and they were getting a whole lot of really good engagement from learners. But what they found was they actually still needed a learning management system to manage their compliance training. And then they set up the learning management system to still report back into the learning record store. Now, other ways of dealing with this is actually not even to worry too much about the learning record store and to actually just work with one of those things on the outside a little bit. So I think one of the dirty secrets of the e-learning industry is that in some ways the e-learning modules are the most expensive way to getting started, and from a learning effectiveness point of view, they're one of the most ineffective ways of learning. That possibly the actual best way to possibly start is social learning. So there is some challenges to that as well, and that what I just said is actually quite controversial. So just think for a moment, instead of doing an e-learning module, could you run a series of virtual classrooms? Okay, now the thing is, the virtual classrooms are easier for a face-to-face trainer to adopt. The pros and cons of them is, yes, you do need to train some people up in some technology. You have flexibility about place. People no longer need to travel for training, but you don't have flexibility around time. People still have to do it at a certain time, and everyone still has to move at the same pace. So the promises of e-learning, it gives people more flexibility about the time that they do things, and more flexibility about where they do it. So it delivers on one of those promises. Also in the TAFE sector and education sectors, it's been found repeatedly that self-paced courses don't have good completion rates compared to courses that actually do involve quite a strong social element. One of the most powerful models with social that we've seen is essentially the idea of running a forum every week, and really having a strong presence from the moderator around trying to help to make sure people participate in those forum sessions each week. So just in the same way you might have a workshop every week, you would have a forum to discuss things. So you actually build it around discussions. Here's the virtual classroom as an approach. Another approach is, we've seen a number of times, is working with mobile apps. And this has actually come about quite often in organisations that don't have great learning management systems, or their learning management systems only allow them to be able to play self-paced, SCORM-based courses, and they want more richer learning experiences. So what they do is develop an app so they can push learning out to people in a more flexible way and measure that back into their learning record stories. That's part of what they need to do as well. Then another approach we've seen that works quite well is the idea that these almost do keep your learning management system just for compliance. And this particular organisation was one of those ones that had a very complex governance model. So it was very hard to actually get content onto the learning management system. So what the L&D team generally did was, when they wanted to do something faster, they would set up a portal on the intranet, or set up another sort of portal, and this would give them complete control over what they were doing, and then add interactive content to the portal, rather than being in a spot where they were having to work through the learning management system. And that just gave them a whole lot of flexibility. I strongly encourage that notion of the portal as a way of getting started as well, and getting started with getting to know some of the technologies and some of the ways of working as well. Now, during the session we did a little bit of an interactive thing about how digital learning can enable the 70-20-10 model. Probably will sometime do a webinar that's just focused on this notion of digital learning and 70-20-10. But just to think about this for a moment. So there's a few different things. Making sure in terms of on your intranet that people have the right performance supports to be able to enable them to be able to pick up something in the workplace and just do it. Job aids, performance supports, just in time information to allow them to be able to work effectively in the 70. The way we think of the 70-20-10 model is, quite often people experience something and then they need to articulate and reflect on that. And it's actually in the 20, either with peers or their manager, that the articulation and the reflection really happens. So you might be getting people to use sort of micro-blogging or social networking technologies to be able to sort of work out loud and talk about what they're working on and what they're learning, or using a tool like the 70-20 tool, which you can, if you haven't heard of it, you could just do a search on 7020. And it's, I think the URL is 7020.com, and that allows you to be able to essentially record bits of evidence that you might have in the 70, and then be able to talk about them and reflect on them, and be able to comment on other people's progress and evidence as well. And then making sure your 10 looks different is my other comment. If the 70-20-10 sits there and says we learn from experience, make your 10 less knowledge based and make it more feel like it's a lot more like it's stimulating the actual experience as well. Now, you've heard me talk a few times about this. E-learning has a quality problem. It's been focused on saving money, which has always meant that there's a drive to make it sort of faster and quicker to be able to actually produce. And it is getting quicker and easier to produce over time. The rapid development tools make it a whole lot easier. But essentially, e-learning is a what I call a renaissance skill. It's one of the reasons why I personally have ended up working in the area. It involves essentially instructional design skills, technical skills, and then visual and media skills as well. Now, in an actual specialised e-learning team, we actually normally have a specialist in each one of those areas, who quite often has a whole full degree in each one of those areas. Quite often the instructional designers have multiple degrees and come from and have a minimum of a postgraduate qualification. So essentially, I think it involves a complex set of skills to develop really great, interactive, high-level e-learning. So if you're sort of working in this mode where you're starting to sort of get started with e-learning, focus in on things you can do simply. My gem of wisdom is to focus on what people need to do, not what they need to know, and to reduce down what you're dealing with and try to explore and get people in that doing mode through interaction more quickly. Also means that an L&D point of view, you need to be embedding learning effectiveness measures into what you're doing as well, and really focusing on the effectiveness of your learning experience, not just how cheap you're making it. Now, 3 ways of getting started in digital learning. We actually see that essentially mature organizations work in a way where they actually work with all 3 of these different types of ways of producing digital learning. Buying a content library, building your own programs, and commissioning programs to be built for you. Now, essentially, if you're a training provider, working with a content library is probably not the way to go, because essentially all you're doing is reselling someone else's knowledge. But we have seen the adoption of particularly lynda.com in an organization mean that an organization's gone from actually having no e-learning to widespread adoption by putting in lynda.com and giving everyone access to that at work and at home. The problem with content libraries is it's not customized to your particular business problems. Build your own programs is actually possibly the most complicated way to start because of that skill set I just talked about a few moments ago. Commissioning your own programs is the most expensive way to start, but you make sure that it meets your business needs and your business requirements, and is sometimes a fast way to get started. It really depends on what type of organisation you are about whether or not you'd get started and where you get started. So I'll hint at it that if you're a training organisation, you wouldn't start here, but you'd probably start with a combination of these 2. Now, one of the questions quite often that happens is, when should you outsource and when should you get external providers in, and when should you do in-house development? We've come up with one rule of thumb that if you don't have someone in your organisation with a title of trainer or facilitator, and if all you're doing in terms of your internal training is corporate induction, you probably don't have the skill sets and the instructional design skill sets to be able to do in-house development. It's a bit like sort of sitting there doing a whole, we currently outsource all of our face-to-face training. Why all of a sudden you're starting to develop an in-house face-to-face or in-house e-learning capacity when you don't actually have the face-to-face capacity to start with? Now, what's fascinating for me for this is this isn't to do with scale of organisations either. We've seen really small training organisations adopt in-house development work, and because it training's their expertise, they've been able to do it really well, whereas we've seen larger organisations that actually just really facilitate training really flounder when they try to do any in-house development work. And then some of the sort of guiding principles around when to bring in external providers are external providers are great for bringing in new ideas. Generally, you would expect an external provider, because they've got those specialised people in their teams, to be able to increase quality and deliver large projects faster. In-house development, yes, you will reduce your costs because you're not actually having to pay money for things to come in, and also you have full control over what's happening as well. The deliver projects fast is a really interesting one, because Sprout Labs, as well as doing the external provider and acting as an external provider, we actually do help organisations develop their in-house capacity. And one particular organisation that we were working to help them move up their maturity curve so that they're doing more in-house development, we worked with them around a curriculum blueprint, and we helped sort of plan through how long that was going to take for them to do in-house. And with their current in-house size of their in-house team, it was going to take them 2 years to do that. And that also meant their in-house development team couldn't do anything else for that 2 years as well. So, whereas for us, it was really just a 6-month build project for those 50 modules. So it was that sense of the scale and scope of it meant that it was probably actually more effective to actually use an external provider to do the startup build of that. Thank you for listening to this presentation. I hope you found it useful. I suppose some of my takeaways about digital learning strategies is, one, think a few steps forward. Don't just think about what you're doing as your next chess move. Think about 2 or 3 chess moves forwards. Really, when you're developing your strategy, really do take stock of where you're at. Try to use external benchmarks to help you guide you with that. And in your planning process, try to build in some innovation projects or pilots so that you can learn faster for that. Don't forget measurement. It is really important. And please, if you're starting on a digital learning journey, focus on quality first. Thank you.